between what the main body of the text, the answers are, and what just the questions are. Question 7. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learnt in the progression from it to the full product? The first thing I learnt was how to place images onto InDesign, and that is a very simple, needed skill that I picked up very well. This was very important because it also allowed me to edit on Photoshop before I put things into a final product. That made the quality of my work higher, and it allowed me to edit things that I may not have been able to on InDesign. By doing this, I also learned how to place different objects on different layers. This made organizing on InDesign a lot easier. So rather than having it all on one layer and having to push things back and forward, I could just put text on one layer, a certain amount of pictures on another, and then anything extra on another layer. That way I could organize it easily and I could put different effects on different layers. Another thing that I learned was that all magazines had a sort of information section on the front of a magazine which had its barcode, issue number, and things like that. This was generally in the same place for the same magazine, but different magazines had it in different places. So it could have been used as something more visually interesting by putting it in, closer towards the masthead, but then that would draw attention away from the masthead. So by putting it in the bottom left corner for the final product, it was in its own section and it was good. The last thing I learnt from the preliminary task is that regulars didn't really need a description, but a description was good, it wasn't necessary. I also learnt that editor's letters contained what the magazine should be about. So by the end of the preliminary task, I had an idea of what went into a magazine, but my skills were not developed enough to show my ideas properly. But then through the trial magazine and through other playing around on Photoshop and InDesign, I learned many different skills. Like in Photoshop, I learned how to use the magic wand tool for quick crops, whereas the polygon lasso tool, which made the cleaner crop, and it allowed me to show the picture better. I also learned that in InDesign I could edit the text a little bit, not as much as I could in Photoshop, but still enough that it was presentable. Finally, I learned that InDesign doesn't have a spell check. That meant that I had to write up all my text on Microsoft Word, then paste it in. It made the process a little bit longer, but it made the quality of the work better, so I believe it was worth it. I also learned how to do a few little more editing tricks on InDesign, which then made the whole process look a lot better.
Question 1. Before I started to design my front cover, I looked at a few magazines on the internet. I looked at magazines such as Vibe, XXL and Mojo. I then decided to design my magazine similar to Vibe because the layout suits my target audience. I spoke to my group and they also agreed to use the same font and masthead on the magazine. I had designed the masthead and used NME magazine as an example. The shot of the model I decided to use was similar to an issue of Vibe. This is because it will appeal to the target audience. The facial expression of the model was angry, similar to the Vibe model. I also liked the background that was used in the Vibe magazine, that it was a faded blue. I decided to copy the background. I spent time and made the background on Photoshop. I also laid out my cover lines similar to Vibe. This was appealing and suited the theme of my magazine. For my contents page, I looked at various other magazines as well as Vibe. I searched the internet and came across Kering. I thought there was something missing in my magazine. There was a lot of empty space. I liked the way Kering filled up the contents page, so I decided to create something similar to the contents page. I created the design on Photoshop and imported it into InDesign. I placed two models on either side of each page. This is so that it uses up space and appeals to the target audience. I also placed the Say No More logo faded behind one of the models on the left. This makes the contents page look unique and makes the target audience look again. For my DPS, I also looked at various other magazines. After planning, I decided to have the pictures of the artist and eye-catching heading on one page and an interview on the other. I looked through the photos that we had taken. I decided after looking at the images that the color scheme for the DPS will be black and white. This is because it suited the color of the model's clothes. The heading AK, the man behind the music, is in capital large and on black background. This is because it makes the heading stand out. The heading exclusive is also large and boxed to stand out. It also gives the effect that the writing has been cut out of the box. The model AK is placed in front of the text behind the music. This is to show that he is the artist and the music is behind him, representing he is the music. Question 7. I have learned a lot of skills during the progression of the product. Firstly, I improved my skills in Photoshop. Although I had used Photoshop before, I never used it to that extent. I improved my skills on cropping out images and adding effect to them. I also improved on adding effects and changing font styles and shapes. During the preliminary task, I found it difficult using layers, but at the end of the task I had a good understanding in using the layers. This helped me in creating my magazine front cover. I had never used a professional camera, neither was I used to a professional studio. During the task I had the chance of using professional equipment.
I believe that my cover does follow the codes and conventions of a magazine. First of all, the image has been structured and put in the middle section of the cover, as where most images are placed, with the cover line surrounding it. This makes the main image the unique selling point, making it easier to catch the audience's eyes and seem appealing. I use 3 main colours, which are red, black and white. The magazines that I did case study on did follow the codes and conventions, and I therefore thought it would be easier for me to use these magazines as a template. However, to make my magazines unique and more appealing, I decided to go against one of the rules by using various fonts, as I believe that my magazine looked more hip-hop for both my contents and double page spread. I think overall my magazine is attractive and therefore easier for the audience to interact with. The house style for the pages are not as formal as normal magazines, as I don't believe that this will represent hip-hop. The images that I have chosen have been slightly edited to look more engaging and alluring, as this will encourage the audience to read it. Also, all the images interact with the audience as they have direct eye contact, making it less easy to avoid reading. The masthead relates to the image significantly, as I think they complement each other and indicate the genre, and this reaches the aims and targets of this magazine. Question 7. During the preliminary task, it was demanding and patience was necessary. I genuinely did not think I would find it so hard, and my attitude was very negative. Therefore, this nearly led me to giving up as a whole. However, I decided to give it a go and eventually realized patience was all it took, and therefore gained skills while creating my LSE magazine that I also later used when creating my own music magazine. When evaluating the preliminary task that I was given, I acknowledged the fact that for me to create a successful media product, I must be optimistic and not give up. Most significantly, I must practice using different tools, softwares, technologies. The preliminary task also indicated and showed me that I should plan beforehand of the media project. This is what I did for my actual magazine. I planned and done my market research to make sure when it came to creating it, I knew exactly what I was doing. For the preliminary task, I learned basic skills of using the softwares, specifically how to adjust pictures, and was extremely significant when it came to creating my music magazine. Overall, if I was given the chance to conduct this media product again, I would have taken more variety of images and maybe changed the colours around slightly. However, I am personally happy with the outcome and therefore think I have done a good job.
How does your media product represent particular social groups? Our media product represents teenagers between the age of 15 to 22, particularly lower to working class teenagers, because we have targeted the price of our magazine to represent them. So as our target market, we have put it relatively cheap, so it's